What's the number one thing that your surviving children need to see in you, in that authenticity and vulnerability?
But it's okay not to be okay. But I think that is the phrase.
Yeah.
Don't worry if you're struggling. It's okay to be like that, and then together we'll kind of work through
this. Steve Phillip, it is early evening for you, morning for me. Thank you so much for your time in England.
You're really welcome, Suzanne. Great to say. You've still got a bit of daylight here in the UK, but it's drawing in very rapidly each day at the moment.
So I want to talk to you today about how we're authentic and vulnerable with our kids when we're not okay, even though I know your entire platform is about suicide prevention through the loss of your son. Before we get into everything we want to talk about with vulnerability and authenticity with our kids, talk to me first about you and Jordan. I know I just was reading up on you. December 4th, 2019, you had a phone call that changed your life and it made you into a suicide prevention and mental health advocate. What can you tell me about that day and where you're at right now before we jump into authenticity and vulnerability?
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne. And really interesting. It turned me into a mental health and suicide prevention advocate. I think you're absolutely right. That's what happened. You know, I'd worked for my previous life, as I call it, in consultancy and leadership and management development in the UK and in North America, in Canada as well. And on that day, December the 4th, got a call from Jordan's partner, girlfriend, who'd come home to find he'd taken his own life. And, you know, Jordan had the diagnosis of clinical anxiety and depression since 2015. He was a highly functioning young man. When he died, he was 34, had a great relationship with his girlfriend, had his own house, had a loving family, despite his mother and I having separated and divorced back in 2005. We stayed very close, and he's best friends with Jordan's stepmom, my wife now. So we had a great, loving family. I had a great career here in the UK with the Independent Office for Police Conduct that looks into investigations against the police and complaints against the police. So on the face of it, this huge network of friends that he had looked at Jordan as this 6 foot plus, good looking lad who was cool, but always the guy that was there for them if they were struggling. They kind of, many of them said they kind of aspired to be Jordan, but what they didn't know was really the depth. And I don't think we fully understood the depth of the mental health struggles that we were going through. And then one day, you know, our world is completely shattered by, you know, a phone call and just everything that I knew about my life and our family's life and anyone who knew Jordan turned their lives upside down.
I was reading up about you to prepare for this, and I just want to tell you, as a mom to a father, my heart just, like, I don't know how you get out of bed in the morning after that. You're living our worst nightmare as parents. You've done so much with it. And what gets you out of bed every day?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question because I am asked that question by many people that I now know in the 5.5 years that I've been doing this, who tragically are going through what I'm going through, and for some of them it's very raw, very, very fresh and new. And that's the question they asked me: how do we get up out of bed? How do we carry on? You know, I said this in the early days. I had two options really. One was to sit on the sofa with a bottle. That was very appealing. Or try and make some sense of as to what had happened, try and understand. Through that process, I think I started to recognize there was maybe something I could do that wouldn't bring Jordan back, but would maybe prevent this from happening to other people. I think it was that sense of purpose. And this is what I say to families that you know do ask that question. I said, look, your grief, what you're going through, is going to be very different to mine, even though you may have experienced a loss through suicide. But all I can say is, if you can find a sense of purpose, whatever that might be, and that might not be setting up a charity or becoming a speaker or a podcaster or anything like that. It might be just finding the strength to get up, go downstairs, walk out the front door and go to the shop, and then do that for the next day. If you can find that sense of purpose, then you've got a fighting shot of being able to move forward. And that's the advice that you would give.
You do a huge amount of work with suicide prevention. Can you give me the top three things that you've learned about with what happened with Jordan, what other parents need to know so that we're not facing the same situation of losing our kids? Because I know it hit you and was a huge surprise. So what, looking back,
Yeah, I'm
do
going
you
to take
tell people now?
that last sentence. There was a huge surprise. Looking back, it shouldn't
Yeah.
have been. It shouldn't have been.
Mm,
So what I now say with the knowledge and the education that I have today, there were clearly signs. Okay, pretty well hidden, pretty well masked, perhaps, but there were signs, and the signs of Jordan frequently telling us how he was struggling to sleep, using the
mm.
words in a communication to his sister on WhatsApp, but on one occasion just saying, "I feel really trapped right now." There was language, there were behaviours that now through education I understand were red flags. But I
That you
also
had
say
no
that
idea back then,
no,
right?
no, I didn't.
Yeah.
So I say now, this is not about blame. This is not about berating myself. This is about
Hmm.
I've kind of dealt with that and put it in a box over here. But this is saying that the toolkit that I had at the time was inadequate, it was really poor, given that I had a son with a clinical diagnosis of mental health issues.
So he had diagnoses then,
Yeah,
like he was officially
four
diagnosed.
and a half years before he died, he was, even though he was
Okay.
functioning well.
Yeah.
So, hey, in a way, you've got a son here with mental health issues. What do you know about mental health? I have to say, I didn't. I really did not know enough.
Mm, sure.
And I've kind of answered that question myself. Jordan was an adult. As I say, he was 34 when he died, just at 29 when he was first diagnosed with mental health illness. He had a busy life. I had a busy life. We meet up for a pizza and a beer every so often. I'll go and watch,
Hmm.
our favourite bands occasionally and things like that.
Hootie and the Blowfish. Hootie and the Blowfish.
Well done. I was
Aren't they?
thinking
They're
that.
Canadian, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
They're great. Oh, yeah.
they're
It's
great. I read
yeah,
that. I'm like, that's Canadian.
yeah, no, they were just great. I was speaking at a conference in London last week and shared a story and did a photograph I share on a slide of Jordan and I sitting in a bar with burger and fries and beer, and that was just an hour before we were going to this concert. First of all, understand mental health, become educated. We are protective of
Hmm.
parents of our kids' physical health. Don't climb that tree; you'll fall out and hurt yourself. Watch out when you're crossing the road. Don't get into cars with strangers. We can
Yeah.
run this list off, can't we? All of us. But when it comes to mental health, we don't know. We don't understand as parents because we don't become educated. Is it because we don't think it will ever happen to us? Well, we should do, given the high instances of mental health among young people, particularly, and the population as a whole. So I think number
Can
one
I
is become educated.
can I add to that? I think because we think the professionals are going to do what they are supposed to do, partly, right? Like we don't learn cardiac surgery. We trust the surgeon, and yet with mental health, we're trusting the system that's broken of enough support.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting analogy in itself, today, because what we're not talking about cardiac surgery here. We're talking about the comparison between someone falling over and hurting their knee, just
Sure.
saying, "Oh, I've fallen over and hurt my knee," or "I've got a cast on because I've broken my arm," and we'll talk about that. But if someone has low-level anxiety or depression, we're not going to talk about that. We're going to keep it to
Yeah,
ourselves quite often. So we're talking about
totally.
a level that over time builds. So we firstly have to become educated, I think, as parents. I think the second thing we have to do is, this may sound a cliche, or we hear it many times, we've got to start talking with families. We've got to start talking openly and transparently with our kids about how we're feeling. I don't care whether you're the parent and in this position of strength in your head that you can't show any vulnerability. Have these open conversations with your children. Spend more family time. We've lost so many of the family values that we used to have sitting around a
Yeah,
dining table and having dinner or whatever.
yeah.
We don't do that anymore. So we've got to create those spaces to make more time. I think is really important and become better educated.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a third one that sits outside of those boxes there. That may well come to me as we carry on.
Sure, we can.
talking,
I just
but
want to add to what you're saying, if I can also. The first one you said, I actually can substantiate that from my research. I had 25 kids that I asked over the course of a year, what did you need as your mental health went down? And that was one of them, that they know we want them to understand what we're going through, right? 25 young adults said we want them to get it, whether it's teachers or parents. And you're speaking my language because I've said this so much to parents. This is so important. You are your child's advocate. You are the advocate. So you do learn it. And we're all busy, but you can say, like, this can be deadly. This isn't to be taken lightly.
I mean, we don't want to do any scaremongering and these kind of conversations, and a lot of the work we do is around hope. But what we've got to recognize is that the biggest risk to a man or a woman under 35 at the moment through their life is themselves. It's not going to be
Yeah.
a road traffic accident. It's not going to be a heart attack. It's
Yeah.
not going to be cancer. It's not going to be diabetes. It's going to be potentially the risk of taking their own life. That's the biggest killer for under 35 for men and women at the
Yeah.
moment. So, and we're seeing a significant increase in 10 to 19-year-old suicides as well at the moment. And there are some colossal pressures surrounding young people that we never experienced. You and your generation, me from generations on as well. We never experienced social media and the pressures that there are today. I'm certainly not anti-tech and I'm not anti-social media, but I think we have to wise up that this is a world that we didn't grow up in, that our kids are trying to navigate. And we need, again, I think, to, as a third point, understand through them, by the way, their world and what they're going through. And I think that's a really important point. I think supporting kids is not about coming in with our viewpoint of the world. It's about getting into their
Absolutely.
and asking them about their world so that we can understand and support them. I think that's a really important shift in mindset.
There's your number 3. That's your number 3 right there.
That was it.
Right? Get into their lens. I had a friend, I've talked about this before. She's like, oh, my daughter's partying and I got through it. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. You can't compare today, 2025 to us. And I'm aging myself, like 1986 or whatever. We have fentanyl overdoses here in Canada. It's huge, right? We've got the social media. We've got all these things that when kids are in their rooms, like we were in our rooms and I was hanging with like Pac-Man on a little machine. And now kids are in their rooms with this whole world in front of them that we don't know. So you're absolutely right. Understanding that world and getting that perspective and a strong grasp of what's going on. It's empowering.
Yeah, very, very much so. And one of the things I'm learning from talking to the young people, Gen Z and Gen A, is that they kind of want to talk about this stuff. And you alluded to this earlier on, Suzanne. One of the biggest things kids are saying is we kind of want to be heard. We want to be understood, but we're not. I think what was really interesting, I'm sure this was big in the States, because I know the young actors just won an Emmy, and most of the cast and crew of the Netflix drama Adolescent that's been on. And it's been absolutely huge. I don't know if you've seen that drama.
No, I haven't.
Oh, it is absolutely worth the watch. It stunned the UK society when it came on with this young actor who's just won an Academy Award or an Emmy or whatever it was for this incredible portrayal. But essentially, it was this young lad who'd been drawn into the incel world, and it takes Andrew Tate and all this. And unfortunately, and I won't give any spoiler to anyone who's watched it, but he commits a pretty terrible crime, which he denies initially, but ultimately is responsible for. And it just really showed the depths of this world. It was fiction, but really interesting response afterwards. Firstly, it's worth watching it. It's a hugely powerful drama on Netflix. But the point I wanted to make was that the discussion that took place afterwards was really interesting, because all the references to different types of emojis that are used when kids are communicating, what do they all mean and that. And the program itself, there was lots of views shared, but predominantly by adults. nobody was asking the kids, is this true? What's happening?
Yes.
No
Yeah.
one was talking to them.
Yeah.
And you go,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah. Totally. It's what I say with my research. Like, we're all these hot adults with all this great experience and we think we know what's best. And we're not actually saying, what are you going through? What are you experiencing? How are you feeling? And then the kids lose out. I had a student last week, first time I met him, I rapid fire a bunch of questions about his life, about his mental health, because it's the teaching I do now. I can ask those questions. And he said, thank you for asking me and for talking to me. And we're almost afraid to, I think. And parents are afraid to. And parents are afraid to say the word suicide. And I told you I interviewed Leslie Wyrick. Say the S word. Say it. And it's the same thing like cigarettes. We learned later they cause cancer. This isn't fear mongering. This is knowing the reality of what's happening in our world with behaviors we're doing.
But if you may remember a time, it's not that long ago, and I talk about this when I deliver my talk, because I deliver a talk called Navigating the S Word, and I deliberately position it as a title there,
Yeah.
because, and the relevance, of course, is it wasn't that long ago that as far as the physical illness of cancer is concerned, we refer to it as the C word.
Yeah. Yeah.
We would,
Yep.
that's taboo. We couldn't
Totally.
talk about cancer,
Yeah.
and now we're here. And we need to get to the same position with suicide as a word.
We do. We do.
Use it in the same way.
Well, and the problem is, though, we have systems that are scared with it. Like, I know there were 4 suicides in a district nearby here back last year, and the schools were not allowed to tell anybody, keep it quiet. We don't want contagion. But like Leslie said, and you know this, just saying the S word doesn't make you suicidal. Asking if you're suicidal doesn't give you the idea, oh, maybe I should be suicidal. And yet there's such a fear in our systems about this contagion issue, which is a whole other conversation.
Yeah, you're right. I think, when it comes down to talking methods of suicide, absolutely. I think we keep that off.
Sure.
The record there, because there is a risk of contagion there potentially.
Yeah.
But yes, the research certainly support. It's really interesting, because I'm going to say something I haven't said publicly, I don't think yet. All the research and the evidence shows that just mentioning the suicide word does not plant the seed in the mind of someone who's struggling with life. But there are points when I think, is there a risk? And I'm just throwing this out as a question. Yeah, no evidence about itself. But is there a risk that if we do keep mentioning it at a high level, that some people might go, well, I hadn't considered that as an option. And the reason why I mentioned it was that my daughter, Danielle, who works with me, only very recently had a conversation with my youngest grandson, who's 8 years old. And he just asked the question. He came out. But what she did really well, because she was growing up, because we never really discussed it with him in any depth. She handled it, I thought, really, really well, because he obviously was inquisitive. And he said, the voice suicide then. And she said, well, it's kind of a situation where people just feel trapped in a situation, or for whatever reason, that they just feel they can't be here anymore, and they end their own life. And he then got inquisitive even further, said, well, how did it happen? Now, Danielle's response to that conversation was to say, right, I need to tell you right now that is not an answer. That is not a solution for you if you are ever struggling in life. Your solution is to come to me and talk to me. So
she's good, Danielle.
She was
love Danielle.
Just dealt with it beautifully. But there is that thought, isn't there? Oh, well, so 8-year-old now suddenly has an understanding of suicide.
Right.
Does that become an option? So, as I say, all the research and evidence suggests that is not the case. But it is an interesting conversation as the word is used more frequently.
You outlined the answer, though. I think you outlined the answer of the concern of contagion. And this comes like David and Laura Donovan, I interviewed a long time ago on my audio podcast, said this. It's not talking about it, it's how you talk about it. So Danielle was able to talk about it in a way that was healthy, that was confronting it, that wasn't going to give ideas of, oh, maybe I want this for myself. It's the how. We have to reframe talking about it with how we are talking about it. Just like how we are talking about cancer and how we are talking about cigarette smoking that leads to cancer. Anyways, let's move on. I want to go into authenticity and vulnerability with our kids, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. You and I found each other. I found you. I found you on LinkedIn. Here's my first question about this. I've never asked this before. why is it that you have 63,000 followers on LinkedIn? Like there's something there. And
Yeah,
I seen your authenticity, but like people are wanting something. There's a reason
yeah, I have a
that
very good
they're
point about
gravitating to this. It's all your family, hey?
yeah, it's well founded. So, I mean, the context, my career before this second life was around my own social media consultancy practice. And LinkedIn was my tool and platform, if you like, of choice. And I used to go
Hmm.
teach this. So, firstly, I had a pretty good understanding of the platform.
Yeah.
I had always been somewhat a storyteller as well through my work and the advice and coaching. So, in some respects, I had a little bit of a head start here compared with others potentially that have been bereaved by suicide. But if you go
Mm.
back to that day and that period of time where Jordan took his own life, I had what was considered to be a fairly reasonable following of, let's say, of 10 or 12,000
Okay.
followers on
Sure.
LinkedIn. But the moment I shared an article I published on LinkedIn 3 weeks after Jordan's death, and that was titled "The Day My Son Took His Own Life," when
Mm.
I shared that article, it changed. Everything
I saw that
shifted.
one.
Following went through the roof. I had people
Yeah.
like Ariana Huffington from the HuffPost emailing me, and all kinds of people. That pivotal, and I think what I understand about that post now, and there was no real planning behind it. I had two reasons for sharing that story. One was, is there anyone else, and forgive the language, going through this shit show, or is it just me?
Hmm.
I didn't know of
Yeah.
anyone else who was going through this, so that was the first question I had. The second question was, can I reach people and share, without too much detail, a harrowing enough story that they will not choose to do the same thing that my
Yeah.
son did?
I think
And that did
people
work.
are
And that worked.
craving. Mhm. It
Yeah,
did work. I
yeah.
read
And
that
people
post.
messaged me and they said, I was considering doing the same. And I read your
Yeah.
post.
And
I
they,
can't do that to my family. So I had to catch breath there every so often. I kind of think back to those things. But that was my true motive behind doing it. And I think what happened
yeah.
then, this response went crazy and it just kind of built from there and people were drawn to me. I connected with more people. I continued, I hope, to share that level of authenticity in the writing rather than just being factual and
Yeah.
informational. It was kind of saying, this is what we're going through, this is what we're experiencing. Uh,
Yeah.
but now with knowledge and experience, I'm able to add some more dimensions to that in terms of, okay, well, look, this is
Hmm.
how we need to kind of deal with this.
Yeah. That's exactly why I think you've got this huge following is number one, people are craving this and everybody's got a story. And number two is the authenticity and rawness that we need, that vulnerability that we're missing in this world. So talk to me now, let's shift with that into your own aftermath of losing Jordan in terms of working, like how you related with your kids. So can you tell me about your grieving process with your kids? Because my goal now is really to get into what our kids need from us when we're not
Yeah,
okay and being raw with that.
well, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I'm a man of a certain age now, and of course, when you say kids, I was stuck with one kid. I was stuck with Danielle, and
Right.
so Danielle was already, I better not mention her age because she still looked like she's about 20, but we need to increase that quite a bit. But she's probably smiling listening to this right now. But how do we handle that? I don't know if we did particularly handle it well as a family. We kept very close in the WhatsApp group with Gordon's mum, with his stepmom, with Gordon's girlfriend, with Danielle, my daughter. We were all in this WhatsApp group together. So we talked very openly about what had happened. Whether we actually sat down and talked, Danielle and I, we talked about this recently. Um, attending a funeral, not suicide related, but
Mm,
together. And we said we never really sat down and had the opportunity. Danielle lives about 80 miles away from it, just for context, so we don't see each other
nice.
all the time. But we never really sat down and we've never gone for a walk or talked about how we feel about this. But I think what we
Okay.
did do was we did talk about what had happened. We did talk about the suicide. And I think it's one of the reasons why at Jordan's funeral there was no hiding behind the fact it was a suicide, and that we were able to talk very openly with family and friends that it was a suicide. I think in turn that allowed us just really naturally to talk about suicide. and to talk about the fact that's what happened to Jordan.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it wasn't so much about sharing our feelings, more about just talking about what had happened and just being almost very pragmatic about it, really.
Y- You're describing a tight connection within your family unit and with your kids to be able to talk about what you did talk about.
I think so, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So are there things then, like looking back, that you would have changed in terms of how you manage grief with your own children?
Yeah, I think I would definitely suggest Danielle and I should have had a conversation before now. We're 5.5, nearly 6 years on now. And I think
Okay.
we should have made the time and not just use busy lives as an excuse.
Mm,
And I think we should have done that better. I think we should have talked more openly with maybe Danielle's children, my grandkids about it as
mm,
well. Once again, we'll use being busy as an excuse and never quite the right moment. And I think we should have had more open conversation. And even on my wife's side, my stepchildren and their children as well. You know, I would go back and say we should have just sat down and had this conversation, because it's what I would be advising someone else to do, to have that
mm.
conversation as soon as possible. Because as children grow up, they will find out the information, they will get the news.
Yeah,
And we know one of the risks with that potentially is a sense from that child that they grow up of being left out and of being, not having had that information shared with them. Now, one of the risks behind that is that individual can go through a second grieving process as a
right.
result,
Yeah.
because okay, I knew Jordan had died, but now I've learned 10 years on or whatever that he took his own life, and this is how he took his own life, and
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
one ever told me. And
Yeah.
I think that's a real, well, it is a risk. We know it's an actual
Right.
publicized risk that people can
Okay.
go through a second grieving process.
Though, Steve, it strikes me there's no playbook for this. And those types of discussions where you're raw with your children or grandchildren and really authentic of what happened, it feels really frightening to me. And I could see a lot of angst about what am I going to say? How am I going to respond to this? I could see a lot of people not entering into that because it's unknown territory and it's a really vulnerable conversation. You're also worried about these fragile beings in front of you.
Yeah, and you know what? I think the most fragile in that relationship is us. The kids are pretty good. It was really interesting. Danielle said
Mm,
he had this
mm,
conversation with her son, the 8-year-old son. He kind of went, okay, and he went off and had his days. He said, now I don't know
right,
what's
right.
being processed or what's going on there. But
Yeah,
he
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
went, all right, thanks for telling. He didn't say it just like, but he said, thanks for telling me. I've got
Huh,
it. I understand. He said, now don't you go talking about it
yeah,
with your friends at school.
yeah,
They are far more resilient in that respect
yeah,
than we think, because we attach too much baggage to all this, I think, as we become adults, and we become too self-conscious at a young age. We're not that
yeah.
self-conscious still.
Yeah, well, listen, you and I don't play in sandboxes anymore, do we? Like life
No, no.
becomes so complex as an adult, and I'm not rolling around in the mud like I used to. So we add all these complexities. One of the things that came out of my research that I'm trying to talk about more with parents and educators I work with is kids know that we are imperfect. They said this to me. We know adults make mistakes, but we just want you there with us, just to be present within whatever mistakes you might make, right? That's liberating in terms of I'm not going to maybe get this right, but I'm in.
I think it's really important. I think we still have this hierarchical hierarchical sort of impression in our heads that the parent has to be up here and be the leader of
Yeah.
the family, be the strong one and all that.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that we're starting to move on in society now, that
Yeah.
yes, you've got to lay ground rules. Yes, you've got to be the parent. You've got to be disciplined. You've got to help your kids learn from your own mistakes as well. But if you don't share those mistakes with them and talk about it at that level,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
then you're just coming from a playbook, as you say, and
Yeah.
and that's where real
Yeah.
authenticity comes in, and even that how that's delivered is really important. You don't want to become the parent that says, "Oh yeah, when I was your age, oh yeah, Dad, don't want to hear that again." We're
Mm-hmm.
careful going down
Mm-hmm.
that route, but in a really authentic way to say, "I understand to a degree, but not totally, what you're experiencing because this was my experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to understand your experience if you're living in a very different generation to me. Tell me what's going on
Yep.
with stuff
So
online.
powerful.
What are the things that are worrying you right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me so I
You
can
know,
understand."
my most favorite administrator, his name's Rob Risch. This is back when I lived in Amman, Jordan, and he was new there. And I asked him some administrative question, and I kid you not, he says to me, I don't know. I don't know this. I'm going to have to go find out. And I went, oh, what? You're telling me you don't know this? You're not supposed to say that as an administrator. And I had so much respect because he was confident and he could still be my leader. And I just, that again, like that authenticity and vulnerability to say, I don't know, I'm going to find out. Actually, I respected him more, and it's what we should be doing as humans. You did a post, Steve. It's why I also reached out to you about this interview, where I think you had said like you weren't doing okay and you weren't having a good day, and being honest with your kids about that, which is why I'm like, that's why I want to talk about this with you. How has that then, being honest with your kids, if I'm having a bad day or I'm struggling or I don't know or whatever it is, how has that also like impacted the healing process in relationships?
You know, from my perspective, I can only speak in terms of my relationship with Danielle, and we kind of work together, and she's a grown up kid as well. But
Right.
I think the fact that what I think what's really interesting in terms of the strength and the bonding between us, I believe,
Hmm.
that we have now is that we may not get that opportunity because we live 80 miles away to sit down and talk, but she will see a post that I share, sharing my vulnerability, and she'll reach out.
Hmm.
I will see her write and probably hear for the first time
Yeah.
her vulnerability. And it's been really fascinating, that process, because interestingly enough, through sharing so openly, right, although we haven't discussed it in depth, I think we have a much better understanding of each other. I would like to think so.
Hmm. Hmm.
Anyway, so, whatever the mechanism is you use, by being prepared to be vulnerable, by being prepared to
Yeah.
share so openly, I think you just develop a different, new level of respect between each other
Yeah.
and empathy as well.
I just had a thought while you're saying that, is that when we are vulnerable and authentic with our kids that we're not okay, we are building securely attached relationships with our children. Because it's okay to have mistakes. It's okay that you make mistakes. It's okay that you're having a bad day because I'm modeling that. And there's just the safety in that, plus the connection.
I mean, how many times have we heard from people, countless generations, who are trying to live up to their dad or their mom or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah. Yep.
because there wasn't that connection, and the problems
For
that that's
sure.
caused. So I think, yeah, I totally agree. I think that
Yeah,
level of
that's it.
vulnerability builds stronger connections.
Right. And yes, yes, this is it. There's this book out called Never Enough by Jennifer Wallace. It's how the achievement culture is toxic. And that very thing of saying, I'm not doing well today, or I'm struggling, or I made a mistake, all of a sudden we're dropping our expectations so that the toxicity of our achievement culture is just kind of dropping because we're modeling again, right? Our own humanity.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, you can be an excellent leader of people and still be vulnerable in that process.
Yep.
And, I can
Yeah.
think back to a talk I delivered 2 years ago now, and it was to a large law firm in the UK, and the CEO of that, or the senior partner of that company, had brought me in through their HR department to deliver a talk to their employees, and he sat in on the session, and he said, "I'll just introduce you, Steve, take a few words." And during those few words, he shared absolutely openly about his own struggles with mental health and suicidal thoughts
Mm.
in that. And it was, and my talk had an impact. We know that it worked, it did its job. But interestingly, the HR director said to me afterwards, by the senior partner opening up, she said, "You can't believe the number of people come knocking on my door in human
Wow.
resources today
Oh,
because it was so safe for them to do so."
that's saving lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Steve, I always end with three wrap-up questions to kind of take us to that goal of being authentic and what that means with our children and rawness with our kids and vulnerability. What's the number one thing then that grieving parents and suicide loss survivors have to prioritize with their living children within being authentic and vulnerable?
Gosh, yeah. I think it is all about how we talked about it really. I think for today, Suzanne, it's all about sharing and being together and allowing that space to share how you're feeling, but also asking them how they're feeling and sharing that experience.
Mm.
There's no there's no hierarchy in grief at all. You know, we're all
Ooh,
going
that's good.
through the same grief
Yeah.
and in different ways individually. I say, first of all, make the time. And I'm saying this from a perspective of someone who didn't do that particularly well, but I would say
Mm.
make the time to have those conversations. You know, how are you tell me what you're experiencing and how are you coping with this? Because this is
Yeah.
how I'm dealing with it. I need to understand that I can help each other. So I think that's the first thing I would say.
Yeah, for sure. Number two, we touched upon too, though. What's the number one thing of every, like if you could just hone in on the in a phrase that your surviving children need to see in you in that authenticity and vulnerability?
Gosh, I mean, we use there's a hashtag used certainly over here a lot, probably in the States. You know, and I'm not a big lover of it necessarily, but it's okay not to be okay. I kind of know where that comes
Hmm.
from, but I think that is the phrase. Look,
Yeah.
don't worry if you're struggling. It's
Yeah.
okay to be like that. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, and again, that just allows permission for someone to go, really, yeah, of course it
Yeah.
is. Just you know, tell me what's going on for you and then together we'll kind of work through this.
That's good. Here's my last question. So we already have talked about how authenticity and vulnerability have, been empowering with the grieving process. What is the number one thing then to that we do as humans to embrace doing it? Because there's so many roadblocks, there's so many albatrosses and fears. Like, so to get over that hump, what's the top thing that we do as humans so that we can actually embrace being vulnerable and authentic?
I think the first thing to do is to examine why you feel you can't be vulnerable. What is it
Mm,
that is inside you?
yeah.
I would
Yeah.
suggest it's often ego led. It is driven by this sense of what will people think of me if I'm vulnerable. But I'd say the first thing is nobody particularly cares about your ego, only you. What they do
Yeah. Yeah.
care about
Good.
is how can they learn from your experience. But if you recognize that by sharing your experience, you're going to help others, then
Yeah.
hopefully that'll allow you to get rid of your ego. That would be my number three.
I would think that it's ego that's our biggest roadblock. If you really flesh it out for anybody, it feels like it would actually all come down to our ego in one way or another. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely, absolutely. So there you go. There's my three thoughts. My three
Thank
thoughts.
you. We nailed that down. Yeah. So Steve Phillip, you've got the Jordan Legacy. Can you tell us where to find you? And you also have Steve Phillip Talks.
Yes, that's a project that isn't going as fast as it should be at the moment. So the Jordan Legacy Festival, lots of resources and help resources we've built, as well as pages about the work we do. So check out on thejordanlegacy.com. And I deliver talks through the Jordan Legacy to schools, to organisations and groups, and usually in return for donations. But very recently, I've set up Steve Phillip as a website, which is mainly aimed at corporate businesses, where I go in and talk with them about their employee well-being strategies, including mental health and suicide prevention, and really the importance of high performing business recognizing that it's only going to be high performing if their employees are in good physical and mental
Mm.
health.
Hmm. We
Achieve
need
that.
that.
And that's why that's set up at the moment.
We
It's
need
always been so
that.
busy, I've not pushed that enough at the moment, but that's
Okay.
work in progress still. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
We need that because I'm seeing this on my end. Our productivity plummets if we don't have the mental and physical strength to take on what we're taking on.
Yeah, I could go on a whole conversation about this.
That's,
I
yeah,
know, I
yeah.
know you've got to let me your show, but just one point
That's a
I'll
whole
say
other,
on
yeah.
that. Just one point I'll say on the workplace thing is that we often measure employees by absenteeism, if you like, as well as their production at work. But the one thing to understand is presenteeism, which is effectively being at work but not being at work. If you know what I
Yeah,
mean in your head,
yeah,
costs
absolutely.
costs
Absolutely.
businesses it costs businesses three times more than absenteeism. So you
Hmm.
owe it to your business to have your employees at work
Yeah,
healthy.
absolutely. Steve Phillip, you are one of the warriors that have taken the most devastating thing I think could happen to anybody, and you've just used it for empowerment and making this world better and rising above the ashes. So thank you for your time.
No, thank you, Suzanne.
Thanks for listening. Now you can do your part and share this with somebody who needs to hear how we are to be authentic and vulnerable with our kids, because at the end of the day, it's what we all need as humans and what they need. It's okay to say that we're not okay. And it's okay for our kids to know we're not perfect. They just want our presence. You can click like on the little link below and subscribe to this channel for more interviews to come about how you can get on your child's turf to connect more deeply with them. I'll see you next time.